An X factor is not necessarily just the best player on a team, but the player that can take a team from a top 10 draft pick to the playoffs, from the playoffs to a conference championship, or even become the reason their team finally wins the Super Bowl. Today we continue our X Factor series on the channel, where I'll be naming every single NFL team's X Factor division by division. The AFC North is up next. Let's roll into today's video. Starting with the Baltimore Ravens are one of three teams in the AFC that are really considered the cream of the crop, right? It's the Chiefs, it's the Bills, it's the Ravens. And there has been a certain edge up that the Chiefs have had, obviously, making Super Bowls, while Baltimore and Buffalo continue to come up just that much short. But Baltimore is very clearly knocking on the door. 2 years ago, they felt like, to me, the best team in the NFL all regular season. Lamar Jackson is a multiple-time MVP. They hosted an AFC championship just 2 years ago. Then they had the playoff loss to Buffalo this past year, which you could point to a lot of different reasons. Lamar Jackson's early turnovers, Mark Andrews drops, the two-point conversion, whatever you want it to be. Point being, we all get it. Baltimore is right there. So when it came time to pick their X Factor, this is one of those X Factors that could really take a team from knocking on the door to winning the Super Bowl. My honorable mentions were Nate Wiggins and Isaiah Likely. I think Nate Wiggins has the ability to really be the true number one outside corner for this team and be a Pro Bowl level player at that spot. Marlon Humphrey was an All-Pro last year as a nickel, and I think Nate Wiggins, with his speed, he showed that the size isn't too much of a deterrent, could be really, really good for this team. And Isaiah Likely, I mean, obviously after everything that happened with Mark Andrews, there were certain Ravens fans that were calling for his job, and I don't think it's that far, but I do think this could be a certain, hey, the young guy is starting to pass the old guy by moment with Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. But my X factor for this Baltimore Ravens team is edge rusher Mike Green. Mike Green has the opportunity to come into Baltimore and be an absolute game wrecker right off the jump. He is a first-round talent that did fall in the NFL draft due to some off-the-field concerns. But make no mistake about it, when Mike Green is on the football field, he is a problem. Last year at Marshall, Mike Green had a breakout season with 17 sacks in just 13 games as a sophomore. There is no denying that this guy absolutely has talent. We as well saw him at the Senior Bowl dominating some of his competition. Mike Green is an absolute beast. At least he was at the collegiate level. And when you think about Baltimore's defense, you don't necessarily think of a dominant edge rusher on this group. And you know, Matabuke had a solid year. Van Noy had a decent amount of sacks last season, but they don't have a Micah Parsons, a TJ Watt, a Myles Garrett. And I get it, not a lot of teams do. But they could have something in that realm of, conversation with a Mike Green. And if you had that to a Baltimore Ravens defense that was already top 10 in the NFL last year, that also added first-round talent Malachi Starks, you may have the best defense in the NFL. And having a good edge rusher is very important. You say the quarterback's the most important position. What's the next most important position? A lot of people argue it's either the guy that protects the quarterback or the guy that's job it is to take out the quarterback. And for Baltimore, having a guy who could really be a pass rusher is crucial. Like we talked about with Buffalo, how do you beat Kansas City? Get to Patrick Mahomes. Make Patrick Mahomes uncomfortable. Mike Green has the ability to be that guy for the Baltimore Ravens that could push them over the top and make a Patrick Mahomes and make a Josh Allen just that little bit more uncomfortable, that could swing some of those losses in big playoff games into wins. Mike Green is the X factor for the Baltimore Ravens this season. If he's a hit and looks like a round one talent in year one with where they got him, the sky is the limit for the Ravens. The Pittsburgh Steelers have a lot of question marks at this point in time. Obviously, number one is quarterback. Is it going to be Mason Rudolph? Is it going to be Aaron Rodgers? Is it going to be Will Howard? I don't know. But there are other question marks on this roster that we can talk about right now and that I do think better fit the X Factor moniker for this football team, and talk about if they can bridge the gap between being competitive and old and being competitive and young and not having a rebuild, retool, tear it down year where they are a bad football team. My honorable mentions for the Pittsburgh Steelers are Minkah Fitzpatrick, who is 29 years old, about to be 30 at the free safety position. We have, of course, seen a little bit of a dip in his play. He's not the Minkah Fitzpatrick that they traded for and traded that first round pick for. And don't get me wrong, he was completely worth it. He was an absolute baller for them. But if Pittsburgh's going to reach playoff levels where they're actually winning playoff games this season, they will need Minkah Fitzpatrick to be a superstar. And Derek Harmon, the tackle, edge, outside linebacker, wherever they're going to line him up. I don't know exactly on that defensive line because it's loaded, but that guy out of Oregon, their first round pick, he's an absolute beast, and they got to find a spot for him on that line, and we'll see where it shakes out. But my X factor for this team is none other than tackle Broderick Jones. This offseason, the Pittsburgh Steelers moved off of offensive tackle Dan Moore, and that opened up the left tackle spot for Broderick Jones. It is his for the taking. Troy Fautanu is going to be this team's right tackle of the future, and Jones, at just 24 years old, has the opportunity to really claim and get a stranglehold on that left tackle spot. And if he can succeed, Pittsburgh has one of the best young tackle duos going in the NFL. But that's a big if Broderick Jones can succeed, because last year he was just kind of middle of the pack. And if you're Pittsburgh, you'd like him to be better than that. Per PFF last year, he had a 58.5 overall grade, which was 89th out of 140 available tackles. A 54.6 pass block grade, which was 97th out of 140 available tackles, but he was really solid in the run game. 64.2 run block grade, 59 out of 140 eligible tackles. And I already mentioned that Jones and Fautanu have the ability to be one of the best young tackle duos in football. But if Broderick Jones is a hit, Pittsburgh might have their entire offensive line figured out for years to come. We look at those two at tackle, Siamalu and McCormick at guard, and Zach Frazier is one of the better young centers in football. Pittsburgh, their true identity has always been in the trenches. They draft Derek Harmon on the defensive line to pair him with an aging Cam Hayward, a TJ Watt, etc. And that offensive line now is looking good in the trenches. It is a big man sport. Pittsburgh knows that. Pittsburgh has always lived by that. And having the trenches secured is a big deal for them. This offensive line, if Broderick Jones steps up to the plate and could just at least hit a double, will be very, very solid for years to come. And Pittsburgh's going to need it this year. Whether it's Aaron Rodgers, Mason Rudolph, or Will Howard, they're going to need all the help they can get from that offensive line. Not a single name there jumps off the page to me as, yeah, that's a guy that can make things happen. Aaron Rodgers, who I still think is the likely Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback, was trying to avoid hits at all costs last year. If you have a quarterback that's playing to not get hit, you better have a damn good offensive line. And Pittsburgh could have that if Broderick Jones is a hit this season. The Cincinnati Bengals are coming off of back-to-back disappointing seasons where they didn't reach double-digit wins, and in fact, they didn't even reach the playoffs. And I get it, some of that's due to injury, some of that's due to slow starts, and some of that's just due to poor play. Regardless, you can no longer have a third straight year of missing the playoffs, especially not in Joe Burrow's prime. How can you be the Bengals, have a top 5 quarterback in his prime, and look at yourself in the mirror after missing the playoffs for 3 straight seasons? It is just flat out unacceptable. So things need to change in Cincinnati. How do you get that change? My honorable mention X factors, Shamar Stewart. You just drafted this kid for the defensive line, and he's the only first-round pick that hasn't signed his contract yet because Cincinnati's causing problems there. And that could be a whole video in of itself, so I'm not going to deep dive it, but Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart, you could just put edge rusher as an honorable mention. And I'm also sneaky throwing Oren Burks in here. This is a guy who was big for the Philadelphia Eagles during their Super Bowl level run after Nakobe Dean got hurt. He showed he could be a real force in the middle of the football field. Cincinnati brings him in a little bit cheaper deal, betting on the short burst run that they saw. Can they get the most out of him at the linebacker position? But my X factor for this team, it's going to sound crazy, but it's wide receiver T. Higgins. And listen, I get it. You're already typing in the comment section about how bad Cincinnati's defense is and their offensive line, and you're like, what are you doing putting T. Higgins as the X factor for this team? Take a deep breath and hear me out on this one. T. Higgins is one of, if not the best wide receiver 2 in the NFL, and he has the ability to dominate cornerback 2s in matchups while the cornerback 1 is focused on Jamar Chase. And there's a reason that the Bengals paid him big money this offseason. When Higgins is out there and when Higgins plays, he is an absolute beast and is as productive as it gets for a wide receiver 2 in football. Last year, Higgins had 73 catches, 911 yards, and 10 touchdowns in just 12 games. There's no denying that talent. In a full season, you're looking at 90 plus receptions, 1,200 plus yards, and maybe close to 13, 14 touchdowns. That is wide receiver 1 numbers. That is Pro Bowl level numbers from your wide receiver 2 in this offense, because when Higgins plays, he dominates. And yes, while the stats are flashy, what really stands out to me is the Bengals record when T. Higgins plays. Last year, when Higgins was on the field for those 12 games, the Cincinnati Bengals went 8-4. That is more than enough to get you to the playoffs if you could get Higgins out there for a full season. That is an 11, 12, maybe even 13-win team depending on the schedule. That really speaks to me as to how the Bengals went on that Super Bowl run a few years ago. The offensive trio of Burrow, Chase, and Higgins was healthy. I get it that it sounds a little crazy to say that, hey, you could just score enough points that you'll win enough games, but ultimately, that's kind of what the Bengals did last year, even with how bad that defense is, and even with how much that offensive line left you to have desired, and the question marks at the running back position that weren't even worked out until mid-season. Regardless of that, when Burrow, Chase, and Higgins were on the field, the bottom line is the Cincinnati Bengals were winning games. A perfect example of why T. Higgins is an X factor for this team is the Denver Broncos game that they played last season. You look at that game and you can't tell me that that offensive trio of Burrow, Chase, and Higgins just sometimes isn't enough to muscle out wins against good teams. That is a playoff level Broncos team that was really improved last year, and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow basically said, Shamar, you take care of Surtain, you'll still get yours, but we're backpacking this game and we're going out with a W to keep our playoff hopes alive. That is the kind of game that this offensive trio can give you, but the trio has to be out there. T. Higgins' injury concerns and health concerns have really hurt this team over the last 2 seasons. Apparently, he's changed his diet, feels healthy, your classic June, best shape of his career. We'll see if it's true, but the Cincinnati Bengals absolutely need it to be true. The Cleveland Browns are one of the oddest teams in the NFL who I do think have a very wide range of outcomes. And I know it's so easy for NFL fans to go, LOL Browns, they're going to lose the game, they're not good, the Cleveland Browns stink, the bag's over the face, whatever you want to say. But I actually do think that the Browns' best case scenario this season does involve them making the playoffs. I actually think they have a pretty decent roster. I mean, we saw it 2 years ago, right? So the X factor for this team really could be the difference between a team with a top 5 pick and a team going to the playoffs. My honorable mentions for that are linebacker Carson Schlesinger. Listen, with the JOK injury news, you hate to see that for the Browns defense, but Schlesinger's going to have to step up in year 1 and play a big role for this team. As well, David Njoku. I think when David Njoku's healthy, he's one of the most talented tight ends in the NFL and could be a true 1A, 1B with Jerry Jeudy in this offense that creates a more dynamic passing game with now what should be a good run game with Judkins and Dylan Sampson. I think there's some offensive pieces there. And I know I tried to not go quarterbacks, but for this team, I have to go with their X factor as Shedeur Sanders. And again, I get it. It's the easy cop-out pick to go with a quarterback, to go with Shedeur Sanders as the X factor for this team, but we had to talk about it. To me, Shedeur Sanders is undoubtedly the most talented football player that plays quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. I get it, the comp is Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, and Dylan Gabriel, but Shedeur Sanders is the most talented of that bunch when it comes to arm strength, when it comes to arm talent, when it comes to what throws he can make, the accuracy, the extending the play, you name it. The Browns' best opportunity to win would be with the football player Shedeur Sanders. Would it be with the person, the leader, the off the field Shedeur Sanders? That's another question. And listen, I'm not a guy who tries to, buy into football drama, media stirred up controversy, whatever it may be. But this is one that I do think we need to take a look at for 2 very important reasons. One, how far Shedeur fell in the draft does tell you something. A guy who was rumored to potentially be a round 1 pick. Hell, at mock drafts a year ago at this time, people had him as the #1 pick in the draft, fell all the way to round 5, pick 144. And that wasn't due to talent, guys. There was a reason for that, and it is character concerns. Number 2, as a quarterback, your character and your leadership matters to me more than any other position. A wide receiver that's a diva, whatever. A cornerback that's an asshole, who cares? But a quarterback, a guy who is expected to be a leader of men, the leader of the football team, and have all the guys in that locker room buy into him, yeah, he's got to be a guy that you could believe in. He's got to be a guy with character. He's got to be a guy that's driven. And I'm just not sure that Shedeur Sanders is those things. And listen, I get it. Maybe I'm out here blowing smoke about a quarterback that's going to be cut before the preseason is over. Hell, the team did draft another quarterback in Dylan Gabriel before him, who Kevin Stefanski seems to really like. But again, I still think that if we were to rank ceilings of these players, Shedeur Sanders is the highest ceiling player in the Browns locker room. And if he matures, and if he gets his head on right, and if the team buys into him, and I get it, it's a lot of ifs, but when we're talking about an X factor, we're talking about ifs. If those things happen, I truly believe that Shedeur Sanders could lead the Browns to the playoffs. They will certainly still be alive for the playoffs in December if Shedeur Sanders could be their quarterback from week 1 and has the locker room buy-in. But as always, guys, these are just my thoughts. Be sure to let me know yours in the comment section down below. If you missed the AFC East video, check that out after this video. Hit the subscribe button to this channel if you love the NFL. I appreciate your guys' support. Hit the like button, good for the algorithm. I'll catch you next time. Peace.